Alright, so welcome back. In this video, I'm going to explain to you why there is a need for a company like PHP. So, if you look at this graph over here on the far left, you'll see that there's two dates. One of them being 1970, the other one being 2013. The reason that these dates are important is because they kind of show where the trend is going and why there is a supply and demand need for licensed agents in this field. If you look at the graph for 1970, you'll see that there were roughly 500,000 licensed agents servicing a population of 204 million Americans. Now, the numbers obviously could have been better, but if you fast forward and compare those to 2013, you'll see that the trend definitely went in the wrong direction. That population of 204 million grew to 304 million roughly, whereas the number of licensed agents kind of dwindled down to what's almost scary, 149,000. So if you look at just those numbers there, you'll see that there's definitely an issue as far as there not being enough agents to really service the community and the population as a whole. So what happens there is you find a situation where a lot of people end up getting left behind, and that's kind of one of the things that we focus on here, is trying to shrink that gap and give some of those people that were kind of left behind by there being a shrinking number of agents in the field an opportunity to kind of get what I like to call some financial education and build financial literacy so that they at least have a better idea of how money works and potential places that they can put their money. So as you can tell, there's definitely a supply and demand need for what it is that I am doing with my affiliation with the PHP agency. Now, one of the things that I also like to stress is timing. When making business decisions, I feel like timing becomes key and it really becomes everything. If I can get into something at the right time, then that makes a major difference. If you think about companies like Apple, Microsoft, Starbucks, 30 years ago would have been a perfect time to come on board with those companies. I think somebody told me one day that Microsoft has like the most millionaire secretaries because a lot of these people that were started off in those positions were there and they were at the right time early enough that they were actually able to get shares and own equity in the company, which is something that we are also offering with the PHP agency. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out and I will definitely answer those questions for you. But this is a really great time, not only within the company itself, but in the field of financial services. Reason being is if you track the baby boomer generation, you can a lot of the time kind of predict what services are going to be the most sought out and sought after and in the most need. So let's kind of rewind back to 1946. So the way the baby boomers happened is 1946, a lot of soldiers were coming back from war and they decided to, you fill in the blanks, they had children. So 1946, a lot of babies were born. Roughly 76 million babies were born between the year of 1946 and 1964. So if you think about that, what is it that babies need? Baby products such as Gerber, Toy, Natel, Johnson & Johnson, baby shampoo, things like that. So 1946, those industries actually took off at a very rapid rate, and you'll notice that there was a large growth and a lot of money that was made. A lot of those products are still around. If you look at Gerber, that woman started in her garage, and now look at what it is. So fast forward 5 years later, those kids are now going to school. So what is it that you need if these children are going to school? You're going to need the schools. If before you didn't have the infrastructure set in place to kind of support this large volume of children coming into the school district all at once, there was essentially a problem. So construction took off at that point in time. If you go back and you look at a lot of high schools that are like grade schools that were kind of that maybe your parents went to or maybe even you went to that weren't kind of built right there as you were going to school, you'll notice that a lot of them were kind of built right there in the 1950s. That's because there was a big boom in the population that was going to school, so they needed construction, and that kind of took off. Fast forward 10 years later, these kids are reaching the age of 16, and I don't know about you, but when I hit 16, the number one thing on my mind was driving a car, and I didn't want to drive my parents' station wagon. Nobody does. Who wants to drive a minivan to school? No, somebody wants something cool. So what took off at that point in time? The Ford Mustang. That's where it came out of, is following that trend of the baby boomers. So if you kind of look at where we're going, if you follow what these people needed, there's definitely an opportunity to make a couple dollars here and there off of it. So fast forward about 15 years later, these kids are now out of high school, maybe went to college, They've started some families. They've reached the age of 30. And what are they doing? They're building houses. They're seeking out their own living situations. They no longer want to live with mom and dad. So this is when real estate took off, was right there in the 1970s, 1980s. And you notice the large boom once again in kind of the real estate market. And that's kind of where it took off. So fast forward to now, these baby boomers are hitting their 50s, 60s, 70s, a lot of them. And what is it that they're worried about? What is it that most people are thinking about when they hit about 50, 60, 70? Retirement. And what happens then is that there's a need for people to kind of help people with financial services and helping them put their money in situations where they won't run out of money and they're going to be in good situations for retirement. So that's kind of where we are now, is that there's definitely a need for financial services right now. If you look at kind of the populations over history, right now there's roughly 82 million millennials out there. That's kind of where I am. Is in my age range. So there's 82 million there. There's 46 million Generation X. That's going to be our parents. 77 million baby boomers, and then 40 million seniors. So there's a large population that's looking, and they need financial services. They need help. There's a lot of students, I touched on this in the first video, that went to college, and 83% of college students have no job lined up after graduation. They are graduating and they're going into the workforce, and they're essentially just grabbing at whatever they can get first because they have to pay bills. That's where a lot of people end up, and they end up stuck in industries that they're not really happy in just because they have to keep the lights on. Another unfortunate reality of the world today is that roughly 66% of the population is making less than $42,000 a year. Now, I don't know about where you're living at, but currently I am living in Toluca Hills, California. Rent is at an all-time high. A lot of you that I'm going to reach out to are in the Chicagoland area. Rent is at an all-time high. St. Louis, when I lived there, rent wasn't cheap. So living expenses are going up. The cost of living is going up, but people just aren't making enough money to really help meet those ends meet at the end of the month. So there's definitely a need to kind of help people, and there's always an interest in a lot of people in trying to find another stream of income that they can add to what they currently have, to where they might be in a better situation at the end of the month to kind of take care of those bills and make everything meet. So like I said, that's kind of the reason that I feel that there's a need for a company like PHP right now. Feel free to like, share this video. I will proceed into the next two topics in the next ones. Hopefully I'll see you there. Bye.